Hello, my name is Klaus Busse, and this is Cars and Culture with Jason Stein.
If I could imagine being a car designer, I'd want to be tall and cool and have a German accent and live in Italy working on Maseratis. Since I'm not any of that, Klaus, I'll just ask what it's like to be Klaus Busse.
Wow, what an intro. I don't know where to start on that opening. Let me put it this way. What is it like to be the head of design for Maserati? It's an absolute dream. It's a burden, it's a responsibility, but above all, it's a childhood dream come true because Maserati was certainly one of those brands that's been with me since I grew up, from the Chamals and the Biturbos in the 80s when I was a teenager. So to be here in Italy and actually having an input in the future of this amazing brand is an absolute dream.
What is the adjustment like to living in Italy? You lived in North America for 10 years, obviously grew up in Germany, and I want to get into some of your history. But now that you have been immersed in the Italian culture for several years now, I know that's had an impact on you. And in fact, you've said a lot of your inspiration doesn't necessarily come from looking at cars on the street, but perhaps having an espresso at the piazza in Torino and looking at dress and fashion. And tell me how it's inspiring you. How is Italy changing you as a designer?
What you're referring to is an important point. You speak about the piazzas and me trying to absorb or having tried to absorb the Italian culture. The reason that's relevant is this is my third physical location to work as a designer after Germany, North America. And I think one of the biggest challenges for international designers like me is to make sure that we represent also the culture of where we come from. Now, some brands might elect not to do that, but the brands I've had the pleasure to work with, whether it was Mercedes, but also, brands like Jeep in the US, it's so important that they represent where they come from. So in the case of Maserati, of course, it's a very Italian luxury brand. So for me, it was very important over the last 7 years to fully immerse myself into Italian culture, to understand what makes an Italian design Italian, but beyond just car design, the full culture. And that's why we're coming back to your point. That's why it has been and continues to be such an important part to just sit at the piazza, have an espresso or an aperitivo. And what I love about when you say I like to watch what people are wearing, I'll give you an example how I would compare Italy to Germany. I'm gonna jump over the US. When you tell my friends in Germany that blue is the color of the year, they will wear a blue suit. When you tell the Italians that blue is the color of the year, they will wear blue socks. Okay, so there's much more creativity in fashion and so much more self-confidence in how they wear it. So for me, it's an absolute pleasure to observe that and to apply that to design.
So beyond socks and statements that are different than the rest of the world, what else have you learned being immersed there? How is Italy different, and how does that apply from a cultural aspect to everything that you do on vehicles?
Well, in Germany, vehicle design is a very progressive business. There's the pursuit of perfection. When a brand like Mercedes would launch a new vehicle, let's say the S-Class, the flagship, they would always make sure they show you the previous generations because it's always an evolution into one direction, the pursuit of perfection. When you go to America, America historically has been very much about style, but even going beyond cars, American design has been very much about honest approach, honest use of material, whether it's the Eames chair where wood is not decoration, but wood is the chair, the Airstream trailer where aluminum is the trailer, not just decoration. And now coming to Italy, Italy has had an interesting journey with car design because the Italians, when I spoke, for example, with Giorgetto Giugiaro, that some of you might know that name, probably most famous car designer in the world. And I talked to him, I said, so what's Italian design for you? And he laughed at me. He said, there is no Italian design. And I challenged him. But what he then explained for me is what Italian design is, because he told me that Italian design is about doing the best you can do in that moment. You don't look back, you only look forward. But what that created is, and you can take any Italian brand, especially when you look at the dramatic change from the 60s to the 70s. In the 60s, you had these beautiful sculptured, hand-sculpted cars. And there was this incredible break to the 70s when suddenly the surface became flat and they did all this kept forward rear engine wedge design. You know, there was the Gandinis, the Giugiaros, etc. So to be able to say, well, look at this, in 1968 we had the most beautiful car ever, but you guess what, we're not going to build on that, we're going to completely ignore that and throw that away and do something completely radically different. This kind of audacity, this courage to always live in the moment and not look back, that very much is Italian design for me.
So well said. So where is Italian design today? Not just from a Maserati standpoint, but from a holistic standpoint.
So I think what you see from us here in Italy, Maserati or other brands, is I think we moved a little bit ahead from this approach that our predecessors used in terms of completely ignoring the heritage and what we were built on, and always doing something completely fresh, because that created a dramatic inconsistency in the storytelling. And the reality is, while that is fascinating looking back, but commercially it's not necessarily the recipe to success, because our customers, and I don't mean the customers of the Italian cars, I mean us humans in general, we just happen to be a species that prefers a certain level of consistency. You can check that every time there's a new song on the radio, you try to connect it to another song you've heard. Every time a new car launches, every time the comments will start, oh, it looks like this, it looks like that. And that's not necessarily meant negatively, it just helps everyone to ground the new, what they see. And that also helps with commercial success. So if you completely throw away what you've done 5 years ago, you always have to force the customer to completely relearn the design language of the brand. And that is not necessarily the right thing to do. So I think what you're seeing coming now from Italy, we still have this beautiful approach to design, that it's not necessarily all just one-way evolution, maybe what you see in the northern countries. There's still the appetite for experimentation. There's still the appetite to mix latest technology, but also with hand sculpture. After all, it's the country of Michelangelo, but also Leonardo da Vinci, who created art as a almost byproduct of science. But at the same time, I think we are stepping more considerably in terms of not to put off our customer every time we're showing a new car.
It's almost an oxymoron. A German designing Italian cars. Stern versus sexy, over-engineered versus past the cappuccino. How does that jibe?
So, you know, we're living in a society where you call me German because I carry a German passport and I was born in Germany. But I would say I left Germany, what is now probably 17, 18 years ago. If you add my studies in England, even longer. I lived more than 20 years outside Germany. And so I would say, yes, I grew up in Germany and of course grew up in that kind of culture. And I have to admit, every 4 years when it's World Cup time, it's all about Germany, I have to admit. But if we ignore football for a moment or soccer for a moment, I consider myself a global citizen. I had to design German cars in Germany. I had to design American products in the US, and now I'm designing Italian products. And honestly, I also learned that in the US, I think us international designers who come into a different country to design a product, it's not just me, there's many examples. We have this incredible advantage of looking at the brand from the outside coming in. If I look back into, you know, all the way back to 2005 when I came to the US and I had the chance to work on, let's say, Chrysler product. At that time in Germany, Chrysler was known for the Crossfire and the 300. Fantastic products, cool products, American products. And then you come to the US and you realize that for a lot of people in the US, Chrysler did not have the same glow and excitement that it had for me coming from Germany. So what I was able to do is infuse a lot of self-confidence into the design team, reminding them on what an amazing brand they're working at. So fast forward to Italy. You know, of course, when you come to Italy, which is a country, it's been all about design. There were indeed a couple of headlines in some magazines about the fact that there's now a German in charge of the design. But number one, design is a team sport. It's never really about just who leads the design. It's always the whole team. But even if you look at the team, it's a very international team. But you have to remind yourself, there's another incredibly important, iconic, cultural relevant Italian product. It's the espresso. And guess what? There's not a single Italian espresso bean in the espresso. The espresso beans come from around the world. It's the process that was invented in northern Italy that creates the espresso. So the way I look at us as design, including myself, we are the chicchi di caffè, which is Italian for coffee beans. And we come from around the world, but we respect, we study, and we apply the Italian design process. And that allows us still to create iconic Italian design.
You grew up near Braunschweig. You went to the Hochschule Braunschweig, which most people in North America might not know, is in the backyard of Volkswagen.
Correct.
Did you want to work for Volkswagen as a designer?
You know what? I don't think I can say yes or no. I would say Braunschweig for me was one of many steps to understand my right of existence as a creative person. Prior to that, I had tried free arts at a free art school for a year. Prior to that, I did internships at a graphic design agency. And Braunschweig was predominantly a product design, industrial design course. So at that moment, I wasn't even sure that car design was going to be my destiny. What happened though is, just like you say, Braunschweig is in the backyard of Wolfsburg, of Volkswagen, and they were offering a design course dedicated to car. And at that moment, I had the chance to actually meet Klaus Busse, who then went on to become the head of design for the Volkswagen Group. And at that time, he was a junior designer helping with the students. But it was my first interaction with one of the greats of the industry who would later then move on into his current role. And then, you know, the flirt started, and the understanding and the passion started about car design. But parallel at that time, through another coincidence, I also had a chance to take a peek into Mercedes-Benz design through an internship at the same time. So there was Volkswagen on one side, there was Mercedes on the other side. But honestly, at that time, it was all about me learning from the best and trying to become a designer. The passion at that time was still in my bedroom, the Lamborghini Countach on the wall, or of course Maserati as the brand.
You had the opportunity to learn at the right hand of your first boss, Michael Maurer, at Mercedes-Benz, and actually Motor Trend in 2020 put you on the list of 50 key players in the auto industry, the power list as they called it. And there was Mr. Maurer, and there you were. That had to be an enormous accomplishment to end up next to your first boss, who I'm sure taught you a tremendous amount about this business.
You know what? Let's start with these lists. I have still no idea why I qualified to be on such a list. But regardless, I take this always as a compliment to my team, because I firmly believe in this as a team sport. So any award or list that has me listed or awarded personally, for me is just a representation of the team. I wish these lists would include full teams, or they would give awards to full teams. But more importantly, I think you're hitting an important point. I mentioned Klaus Busse earlier, who I met in Braunschweig, then Michael Maurer, who now is head of Porsche. As a matter of fact, he also at one point was the head of design for the whole Volkswagen Group. So again, I had the incredible opportunity to have as my first boss such a talented guy. And what Michael told me is not only to continue the passion of design and apply it to Mercedes-Benz, but his leadership style. A leadership style of family, of being friends, not of clocking in the morning, checking back out in the evening. That's it. It was truly a life beyond 8 to 5. If you become a designer, it is your life, it is your work, and that's something that Michael was really able to convey. But as you probably know, I went on to work again with other amazing people. Ralph Gilles, my current boss, global design boss, and also best friend. Also learned so much from him as a mentor. Because you said earlier, when a German comes to Italy, I would take that historically back to when the German came to the US, because at that time I came there as a Mercedes expat, and I was still very German at that time. And Ralph not only introduced me to what is really American design, but he also helped me become adopt to the American style of management and leading a design team. So I think I probably owe him the most of all the people I interacted with.
Yeah, we've had Ralph on this program, who was a remarkable interview and a remarkable person,
Yes.
just in general. Let's talk about your work at Maserati. For me, it starts and ends with one of your latest products, with the MC20. You said it was an amazing honor to touch that machine. What are you most proud of with the MC20, which, by the way, turns heads at every opportunity when it's on the road?
You know what? It's interesting you asked that. Pride does not come to mind when I think about the MC20. It is an endless amount of gratitude and a certain level of relief mixed with maybe satisfaction that we were able to deliver a product that I think is reviewed from people other than me or my team. People look at this objectively, viewed as something that very much fits the line of Maserati and is going to be a car that will be talked about long after I'm gone and my team are gone, and will appear in concours d'elegances and will go into collections. And this is something, Jason, I cannot stretch for you and your listeners or viewers on YouTube, this kind of responsibility, because you can imagine when someone says, well, first of all, you get a chance at leading Maserati design in itself as a responsibility. But then when first there's rumors and there's first conversations, and then suddenly it becomes official that we're going back to designing a super sports car, there is a moment of joy. But I guarantee you, Jason, it didn't last longer than maybe half a day, because then this weight on your shoulder weight comes in, because you're realizing this is not a car for a 3-year lease contract. This is a car, again, they're going to speak about in 50 years, maybe beyond that. And this responsibility still sends shivers down my spine. And when I see the all the love and the respect we're getting for the car, yes, there are awards, most beautiful cars in many, many countries. But more importantly, the love I get directly versus via social medias from the customers on Instagram, for example, that just means so much. But like I said, pride is not the word that comes to mind. It's really more of a relief, and I'm so happy for my team to have able to conquer this big mountain.
Klaus, I want to go back to something that you said a moment ago. You said you're designing a future collector's car if you're designing a Maserati, and you have said that in itself is a monstrosity of a responsibility on your shoulders. So I'm assuming you sleep at night, but you're probably left awake many nights too.
Yeah, Jason, it is, again, coming back to the power of the team. I am not a dictator, a design dictator. The reason I can actually most of the nights sleep well is simply because I sit down with my team and we harvest this energy and the knowledge of the team, because I was able to surround myself with incredible talented people in all my steps of my career. And I think that really made us strong as a team. And so what we do is, in the particular case of the MC20, I wouldn't say we talked more than we sketched, but there was a good balance towards that conversation that we had amongst us as a team, because any Maserati, but mostly with a car like the MC20, we had to solve in our head, what do we need to do to elevate the brand? Because this is more than just a car, it's a brand ambassador. And how can we do that? What is our right of existence? What is already happening in the supercar market? And there's plenty of product. And how can we be different? How can we be Maserati? How can we be Maserati even without a trident on the car? So there's a lot of debate and conversation that goes in there. And I hope my team would agree that my leadership style is very much about forcing them to give me their honest opinion about what they think we should do. Now, at the end of the day, it becomes my responsibility, together with other leaders at Maserati, to then digest this recommendation. But the outcome of this conversation then is that the car almost had designed itself in our heads. And we only have to basically put the pen to the paper and sketch it. Sounds a little bit easier than it was, obviously, but there's an important role in this kind of philosophical debate.
You've also said that there are visual things, the face that you see on the MC20 and other aspects that will foreshadow where Maserati goes in the future. And you also, and you said you did not want to design a car for Instagram. You didn't want to design a car that shouts, "Look at me," and is too aggressive, but you wanted to design that visual value, something that was made it a rolling sculpture to some extent. Have you recaptured what it means to be Maserati?
So I think there's 2 points I would say to that. Number one, why do I think visual longevity is such an important part? And it's not only because it'll go into a concours d'elegance in 30, 40 years, but if you look at where we are as a society and the role of a luxury brand, and we are a luxury brand, I think our obligation, and when I say our, I mean all luxury brands, the obligation is to deliver visual and qualitative longevity. Because I give you the opposite example. Luxury brands I do not have respect for are the ones that are commanding a high price, and they're probably delivering good quality in terms of product, but there's no visual longevity. In other words, if you look at some fashion brands, they force you to rebuy every 6 months. Now that for me, can be perceived as luxury because it's going to be expensive, et cetera, but it's not the role that we need to play in the level of being relevant and sustainable. Because I do believe that, if you allow me to speak about sustainability for a moment, because it's very close to my heart, and not only mine, but us as a brand and as Stellantis, is that to be sustainably relevant, you can do two things. You can continue to buy a high quantity of product and make sure it's either recycled or it's recyclable, or you can buy less, but make sure that that one object that you buy has that longevity, qualitative and visual. And I think that's what we're doing with Maserati, with an MC20, or other Maseratis too. Point number one. Point number two I would like to make, coming back also to the rolling sculpture comment, is again, looking at society. Now, obviously, I've lived in many societies and understand there's a different approach and understanding of car culture. A big difference between USA and Germany, for example. In Germany, there's a very critical debate about cars in general, luxury cars, SUVs. And so now I can design a car that looks like, that shouts, "Look at me." I could add extra spoilers, extra air intakes, and a lot of edges and decorative elements. But is it the right move? Because do I really want to create this kind of attention that sometimes can be negative? Or do I create a car, and that's what we've done with an MC20, but also other products, that really only use the minimum required air intakes, that tries to avoid spoilers, that creates truly a rolling sculpture, and by doing that adds visual value to the environment and hopefully is appreciated versus creating negative context. And the good news is, from all I can hear and all I see, is we have exactly accomplished that with the MC20, but also other products like the Grecale.
And you spent thousands of hours in the wind tunnel in order to ensure that the downforce on the MC20 was sufficient for the vehicle without adding a spoiler. This is the completely new format to some extent, especially for Maserati.
Yeah, you know what? It was very clear in the beginning that we wanted to try to work without a spoiler. Number one, it's visual noise. There's a space for a spoiler when you really go track and you do a track car, etc. But for a Grand Touring supercar, we wanted to remain as pure as possible. So we try to avoid the spoiler as an add-on piece. And secondary, if you do a moving spoiler, which we could have done to hide it while you're driving it, it adds weight and it compromises the space of your luggage compartment. So also that was not a good idea. So instead what we did, exactly what you did, what you say, is to be almost real-time designing the car with the aerodynamicists in Modena. Actually, wind tunnel, yes, but these days is actually all artificial. The computer does that for us until the final check in the physical wind tunnel. And so we did the car real time with aerodynamics, and that allowed us to design the car like a wing. If you, for example, I'll give you one interesting detail. If you look at the section of the wheel arches, normally they are very sculpted, they're peaking, they're round. On the MC20, they're not completely flat, but they're more flat than round. And so even the surface of the wheel arches creates downforce by being basically a wing surface.
When you think about the future and where the industry is going, it is undeniable that the electric vehicle movement is picking up speed, if you will. You drive, or at least you did drive, a Gran Cabrio with a naturally aspirated V8. And you love the sound of a morning cold start with a V8. Who doesn't, right? But you did something interesting as you started to examine how EVs would change design and change product development. You challenged yourselves with an interesting exercise. You took a video of a 1954 Pininfarina designed A6 GCS, you say the most beautiful Maserati ever put together, driving through the streets of Italy. You muted the engine sound and played classical music. And what came to mind when you did that?
Goosebumps. It was literally goosebumps. And it was this eureka moment of the future is going to be great. And mind you, this exercise I did exactly when I arrived at Maserati, because at that time, it was clear for us designers who live in the future that this will come. We didn't know at what speed and with exact every little consequence. But it wasn't done last year or 2 years ago. It was done 7 years ago. Because there was this challenge about what if, which we didn't know at that time, we would go electric. What if the engine sound would go away? Electric cars still produce some sound that you have to do for legal reasons. So we did this exercise. But you know what? The interesting thing was, while the video looked great with the original sound, I would argue it almost looked more emotional without the sound of the car, because suddenly you over amplify the visual impact of the car. I don't want to make advertisement, but there's a fantastic TV show where all characters, a few chosen, are blind. And I struggled first with the concept of the show, but once I got into it, the show did an excellent job of telling the world through the, well, I almost said through the eyes, but through the ears of someone who's only dependent on sound. And it was fascinating. And so we did it the other way around. We basically created something that now going forward will almost exclusively depend on visual. So what you need to do is you need to remind yourself then in the conversations with engineering and packaging, etc., we need to make sure that we maintain this aspect of rolling sculpture, which means we need to have amazing proportion, we need to have amazing design. And I would add, if you allow me, I would add one more anecdote to it. When we had the lockdowns, one of the many lockdowns here in Italy during the pandemic, streets became silent. And suddenly, when you would hear a high horsepower car, like, for example, my Gran Cabrio, which I still own and will always own, announcing itself from 5 minutes away, I started to ask myself, is this something that will be accepted beyond car fanatics? And I'm not so sure it will be, to be honest. And I think you will earn much more respect if you almost enter the scene silently. So I'm absolutely optimistic about that aspect.
Wow, that's an interesting perspective, one that I have not heard. The sound of the internal combustion engine may be ostracized to some extent.
You know what? I love that cold start. I do. You know, it's for me, my car is a reward. I'm not driving it on a daily basis. I usually drive it over the weekend. I will do so again this weekend. And yes, when I go into my garage and I start that car, it's more than just starting a car. It's like, yes, now the special part of the weekend will start, and I'm going to go to the mountains or to the sea or any of the beautiful places around Torino. So it's really a hedonistic, rewarding part of driving the car. But I also admit, if I drive the car on a long distance, just 2 weeks ago, we were driving the car down to Saint-Tropez, we're driving some of the mountain passes of the Alpine, of the Mediterranean Alps. And as you're by yourself and you're going through these amazing, beautiful natural roads, these curvy roads through nature, I were wishing at that moment that the car would be electric. And I could just appreciate the handling of the car, which is fascinating, and just enjoy being there, driving the convertible with the roof open, be there with the nature, driving an amazing car, which is stunning inside out, but even further mute the sound. So it already has crossed my mind that I would be one of the first customers, probably.
Wow, unbelievable. Let's talk about the structure of the company these days. Of course, well known that Stellantis is the entity, is the kind of the mother company, if you will. You've gone through your share of iterations: Mercedes-Benz, Daimler, Chrysler, Fiat Chrysler automobiles, Stellantis. You're a survivor, Klaus. You have managed to navigate all of those companies and still exist here. So what does Stellantis mean? And tell me a little bit about the French influence into the company as a whole, now that Peugeot has amalgamated with the rest of the family.
So I would say two things. Number one, Stellantis, and I can speak now, looking back of over a year of us working together as all 14 brands, is a world of opportunity. It allows brands like Maserati to use excellence and know-how where needed, but remain independent where they want. So I think it's an absolutely fantastic opportunity. Just like you see with other luxury labels, there's Kering, there's LVMH. Those are basically the two houses for all the other fashion labels. There's no independent Gucci or Balenciaga. They're all part of something bigger, and we are part of something bigger. And this gives us amazing access to technology. Number one. Number two, I never looked at this from, is there French influence? I would not say that at all, because we are a truly international company. With brands, of course, in the US, with a brand in Germany, with Opel, with brands in Italy, with brands in France. So I would say fully passionately about Stellantis that this is not a nation-led company, whether you pick France or any other country. It is truly an international company of excellence. And so for me, I'm absolutely enthusiastic about the opportunities we had already and we continue to have.
In your role now, looking at, I guess, the purview of multiple brands across Europe, how has your own function changed? What are you looking at differently now? So
one aspect that I haven't really talked about much publicly is that other than Maserati, I have other roles. Of one is I'm leading what we call the Stellantis Design Studio, SDS. And that basically is, before rumors start, I'm not leading all of Stellantis design, automotive design, but I'm leading all of Stellantis non-automotive design. So what that means is we are basically, on one hand, it's an internal agency that allows for brand amplification, to do whatever we feel we want to do beyond the car. And you can imagine for Maserati, that's why I love this second role I have, is the opportunity to work with a team that allows us to go beyond car design. And I'll leave it to your imagination what that might be. But furthermore, we're now allowing external companies that are seeking for design expertise to tap into the design expertise of Stellantis. And we can do that through the services of the Stellantis Design Studio as a creative agency. So the reason I mention that is because that allows me basically to interact with each of our 14 brands, because any brand, any company could come to us and say, we would like a product designed by Maserati, but they could also say, we would like to have a product designed by Jeep or by Ram. And that's something that my agency, my team facilitates. And so because of that, I'm forced to interact with all 14 brands, not just with Maserati. And that again takes me back to my enthusiasm about Stellantis.
What have you learned with the interaction of all 14 brands? I mean, this is a wide swath that you are cutting now.
Yeah, I would say we're coming back to the culture of nations. And I would not necessarily say the individuals, but what the brands are representing. It's easy for your listeners to understand when I speak about Ram, how uniquely American that brand is. But you can say the same about Dodge and the Mopar community. You can say it about Jeep, even though it's a very international brand, but with very American roots. So on one hand, I need to not only understand Dodge, Ram, or Jeep, I need to understand the American customer, the American culture, and what an American product represents. And the same I had to do for Italy. The same already had to do for Germany, even though working with Opel is a different representation of Germany than maybe Mercedes, but equally fascinating. And then, of course, there's French design and French culture. And that for me has been an area I've never worked in before. So to have the chance to work with my French colleagues and also helping them with their brands, like I said, beyond cars, and understanding what they're trying to do, for me, has been a very, very fascinating journey.
If you were tapped for the top job at Stellantis one day, not to push our friend out at all, because we love Ralph exactly where he is, but hypothetically, if that were to occur, would you have to reconcile the very different design cultures in the portfolio, or would you leave them exactly where they are?
I will not speculate about that, Jason, for a simple reason. I don't even know if I would accept such an offer if it really came. I totally agree with you. Ralph and I, by the way, are the same age, so he has many, many years in him. And I know by interacting with him, not necessarily daily, but weekly, I'm still learning from him. And you know what? I can tell you, there's only one rule when it comes to career. I ask myself, can I do the job better than the guy I report to? And Ralph has always been that many steps ahead of me. So he's still someone I look up to, I learn from. So this scenario is not really in my head. And therefore, I don't really think about these things. I would actually say the opposite. I really learned to appreciate. No, I wouldn't say I learned. Let me get at this from a different angle. In the US, I was responsible for the interior design of 5 brands: Jeep, Dodge, Chrysler, Ram, SRT. And it was a fascinating journey, and we did great things. But at the same time, there was a level of frustration in me because I could only touch every brand 50%, if you consider interior design 50%, just for this conversation. And what I now can do with Maserati, I can touch a brand 100%. And I don't only mean interior design, exterior design. I spoke earlier about my agency, SDS, Stellantis Design Studio, where we go beyond the car. So I can truly, I wouldn't say control, that would have been the wrong choice of word, but I can truly influence and collaborate with my partners on Maserati creativity, design, holistically. And that is such a rewarding and fulfilling job that I wouldn't know why I want to trade it for anything else, even if it would be a promotion. I think I would have to really think about that hard and might have to say no even.
Sure. Let's talk philosophy for a few moments. And speaking of Ralph Gilles, we've had him on this program along with Frank Stevenson, Ian Callum recently. You joined a very short list of designers that we've had on this program, but I've asked them kind of similar questions around design philosophy. What are the enduring characteristics a car design should have?
At the end of the day, the way I look at it is, I can give you something very pragmatic, and I would use probably something that I might have said before: proportion, longevity, functionality, etc. But I want to answer this a little bit more on a higher level. And I want to come back to this, what is such an important topic for me is society. I think at the end of the day, car and car culture, culture by definition is in connection with society. Culture changes, society changes, and therefore car design has to change. It has to address the changes in society. Certain things will never go away. You always have to make sure you can get in and out of a car comfortably. You have to make sure it's safe. You have to make sure it's ergonomically. You have to make sure that the design, again, is visually pleasing, has longevity, etc. But these are fundamental building bricks on which I always try to build something more relevant for society. I gave you an example already about the MC20 and not being a car that looks shout at me. But I want to give you an example of my previous role, where I was also in charge of the design of Fiat, where we designed, which is, I don't think you have it in the US, but the 3rd generation of the beautiful Fiat 500, this very iconic Italian car. And again, when we designed the car, we looked back at the 1st and the 2nd generation. The 1st generation came out in 1957. It was the democratization of mobility. The car looked optimistic. The car had a cute factor. It was Dolce Vita in Italia, right? So it very much represented what was going on in Italy and in Europe at that time. It was, the years after the war, people started to travel again, enjoying life again. And then in 2007, we did the 2nd generation. Now, 2007, you remember in the US, the Yes We Can movement, right? So again, there was a lot of optimism. When the car came out, we gave it a lot of beautiful poppy colors, the yellows, the red. The car was vibrant, big, optimistic, googly eyes, because it represented this kind of culture. Of course, yes, we can was very much America, but there was this period worldwide where there was optimism about the world growing together and being a more collaborative and peaceful place. Now, coming to when we launched the latest iteration 2 years ago, unfortunately, just before the pandemic, of course, we did not forecast the pandemic or worse things to come later, but we realized that there was a certain weight on society spawned by connectivity, internet, globalization. And so we took a more serious approach to the car. The car didn't launch with any bright colors. There's no yellow. There was no red at the beginning. It was a more sophisticated color. The car had a more serious look than the car from 2007. So all three cars did what they were supposed to do. They looked great. They were functionally fantastic and ergonomically fantastic. But more importantly, and hopefully this is a good example, they were respecting society, which means you had to really work hard, understand, and attempt to forecast where society will be when you launch that car.
Exactly. You have to be very predictive with where you think society is going to move, because you're 3 to 5 to 7 years ahead all the time, aren't you?
Absolutely, and that's the challenge. Now, again, I will not pretend we're always right. Like I said, no one predicted a pandemic or wars or whatnot. But I think what we do is literally on a daily basis, we go beyond cars. We talked about it earlier, things I learned from someone like Michael Mauer. Your design job does not stop when you leave the studio. Every documentary, every newspaper article, the coffee at the piazza looking at people, everything is adding to that tremendous complicated puzzle about who is our customer, not as an individual, but as a representative of a culture of a society.
Give me a list of consumer products whose design you simply cannot get enough of. Phones, watches, clothes, eyeglasses.
Yeah, well, I have to admit, apart from cars, the one thing where I hate myself for is that I start to fall in love with sneaker design. Okay. Now, the reason I say I hate myself for it, because sneaker design is doing so many things wrong. Right, it is a temporary product because they wear off, and yet they're so complicated design. They're not very easily recyclable because most of them are glued together with so many pieces you cannot really recycle the thing again. Then most of them have wide soles and they get dirty the first 30 minutes you wear them. So there's so much wrong about sneakers, and yet I love them. I love the creativity. I love what brands like Nike have done over all these years to turn a product that was simply allowing you to get from A to B comfortably into a cultural icon. I have a lot of respect for that, even though I'm fully aware that I'm contradicting myself when I speak about luxury earlier and with all the defects that a shoe basically has, a shoe design. But that's probably the one area that I'm fascinated by. Other than, of course, all designers, we follow electronics and technology, but less from a pure product design point of view, more from a functionality and what it allows us to do.
So who do you admire? Let's talk watches.
You know what? I'm not a watch guy. I wear an Apple Watch. Again, the TV program I was mentioning earlier was Apple TV, so I'm not getting paid by Apple here, but Apple Watch, because I love the functionality of it, and I'm not going to speak what it is. You all know. I actually, a good friend of mine, he is the former editor of a big magazine in Germany, and he kept telling me, Klaus, you need to wear a watch. It's part of who you need to be as a designer. It's branding yourself, blah blah blah. And I can't, because I just not interested in that aspect. Now, I respect watch design. I follow it closely because there's a very close link to luxury and a very close link to what we do with our cars. Don't forget, Maserati have clocks inside, right? So of course we follow and look what watch design does. And I'm fascinated by it. Also with recent watches that are now going into the digital age and the conflict they're facing, going from this beautifully hand-assembled, complicated piece into basically a circular screen on a beautiful leather wristband. So also that industry is facing similar changes and challenges that we face with cars. So I'm observing the industry, I'm following it, but I don't think I am and will ever be a real aficionado. I do know what an Audemars Piguet goes for. I know how the value of these watches. But like I said, I'm not following it with the same enthusiasm. It's more like a part of who I am, being the head of design of Maserati. I pay attention to them, but I'm not passionate about them.
You do follow. One thing you are passionate about that I see is you follow Formula One racing quite closely. And I think you had a hand in the livery of the Alfa Romeo Formula One car, correct?
Yeah, so Formula One, there's two aspects to why I'm so passionate about it. Number one, yes, during my time as head of Alfa Romeo design, we were designing the liveries for the team. And when you do that, you get a really beautiful insight into the workings of a Formula One team, because you have, one of the seasons we actually had the car in the studio, of course, in a super secret locked location where we already taped up the livery for the next season. And it was just fascinating, and it was usually my last thing every day before I left the studio, going to that beautiful room, looking at this amazing machine of technology, because it's really inspiring. And I want to maybe also create the bridge to Maserati. If you work for a brand that is born in racing, that means you cannot be sentimental about your past, because you lose. There's not a single race car on the planet that will ever run a race that was designed by look at this beautiful race car we did 20 years ago or last season. The one thing you always have to do, and maybe that's, again, it's Italian design when we speak about the fact we always do the best we can in this moment. And I would also add, because of that, Maserati, I always see design almost secondary, because number one is the performance, is how the car handles and what it represents. But I would also do another shout out to the new ownership of Formula One. I think what they've done with social media, allowing us to live and laugh and share our stories about Formula One every single day with amazing footage and stories on Instagram, versus, when we grew up, it was Sunday every 2 weeks, and that was it. Maybe Monday morning newspaper, and then you had to wait another 2 weeks. Now Formula One is present every single day, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. Also with the TV show, what is it, Drive to Survive, mm-hmm. which brought my son into Formula One, which I thought was a lost cause. I thought I was truly dead to that generation that was not interested in cars. And heads off to those guys for raising these emotions.
We had Stefano Domenicali on this program, and he talked about the influence and the way that they want to open up the world to Formula One, to pull the curtain back and to expose to the stories and the characters and the actors, if you will, in a very, very interesting ongoing play. So you have hit on exactly what he said. Let me ask you a final thing. And I've asked this of the other designers on this program. How do you want to be remembered as a designer?
I don't want to be remembered as a designer. I want our product to be remembered. And I don't want any product to be remembered designed by Klaus Busse, because that is simply not true. I want our products to be remembered by that generation of designers coming from Centro Stile Maserati. I want to be remembered by the people I work with, hopefully as someone who's a team player, and that allowed them to be the very best of themselves.
Wonderful. Klaus, thank you so much for being part of this program.
It was an absolute pleasure to actually see you on my laptop and not in the Delta Business Class lounge in Detroit. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein, former publisher of Automotive News, is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on SiriusXM Business Radio.